I don't know how that happened, but we ended up with two different links to the same class.
We're blaming you. We're
Yeah,
saying that you ended up with something else. How's that?
Yeah,
We're
just
laying the
just one
blame squarely on you.
person, just one person created links for this. So one person must have created two.
That's it.
Well, I'm not sure how that even happens. I didn't send out more than one link, and I put that link in the spreadsheet. And Heather was the one that was in the other class with me. So clearly that was advertised. That hasn't happened in 100 and some Zooms. So that's a first.
Well,
Okay.
at least we're here.
Well, it's time to get started, isn't it?
Yep.
Which one of us wants to go first?
Well, since you had the most significant as far as link, the PowerPoint, if you want to start, and then I know Jeremy had some slides, and then mine's pretty flexible, so I can, if you want, I can bring up the rear with just the final points. That sounds good.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, are you guys seeing that? And gals?
Yeah.
Okay, good deal. Well, thank you all for tuning in tonight for the Mountain Zoom series. And I'm Shad Baker. I'm the agriculture agent in Letcher County, Kentucky. We have with us Phil Meeks, who is the ag agent in Wise County, Virginia, and Jeremy Williams, who is the agriculture agent in Harlan County. And tonight's subject is on winter gardening, and that seems maybe like an odd time of the year to talk about this, but this is actually the time that you would start to prepare for a winter garden. And it's a little different maybe than a regular garden because there's only certain crops that it will work for, but it's useful for other reasons. And so we thought we'd offer a class in it. And I want to start by just saying that gardening was man's original and purest purpose. And so I think there's something in us that predisposes us to want to work the land and to get our hands in the dirt. And so I think it does something for us that is, I would call that spiritual. But there's just something that is edifying about watching something grow. And there's tangible benefits that we can, I guess, quantify. Being out in the sunlight gives you exposure to vitamin D, and I know that's a little bit diminished in the wintertime, but it does still take place. There's research to back up that there's decreased risk of dementia if you garden, and people that garden tend to have a better outlook on life, so it kind of boosts their mood. There's a lot of exercise involved. If you've ever worked behind a tiller or hoed a row, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's physical work, but not something that's so difficult that even an elderly person or even somebody that maybe isn't in the best of shape can still take part. And then it also helps with loneliness. And all of these things are useful during this pandemic. So if there's concern about COVID, if you look at this list of things, these are all things that have been impacted by being trapped indoors or isolated away from other people and from our normal routine. So it's a good thing to be doing right now. Now, there are some caveats to gardening in the winter, and one of them is that there are limitations in the intensity of the solar energy that is striking the northern hemisphere. So I don't know if you've ever paid attention to it, but we kind of peak out as far as the amount of solar energy hitting the surface during the summer solstice, which is in late June. And really before the equinox, it's really low. And after the September equinox, it's kind of low. So the peak of the growing season is where that sunlight is most intense. And you'll notice in the springtime when you plant something, the plant starts off kind of slow and then it accelerates. And you'll see that your tomatoes or your beans or whatever, they're really slow to grow early on. And then there's this time that it just seems like they explode and they grow really quickly and they produce their fruit, and then it kind of tapers back off. So if you're starting seed during that time frame, you get a lot faster growth. If you try to start plants after that, depending on the species of the plant that you're trying to grow, the growth can be much slower. And for every day that you delay in starting some of these seeds, it can put you in a position where there's not enough time to catch it up. So it gets really slow. This next slide kind of magnifies that a little bit. If you look in particular at this second slide, and I don't know if you guys are able to see my cursor or not that I'm spinning around on the screen, but it's that one at the top right. And that just kind of shows the difference. And I guess the one on the left would do the same. It shows you the difference in the light between June and December. And we are at the 37th latitude. So if you kind of go up from just shy of the 40, you can see that there's a huge difference between June at the top and December down here on the bottom. And so it's somewhere in the neighborhood of a third. So there's going to be a lot slower growth. So you can't afford to be even a few days late on this. If it says to plant something on September 15th, you really need to plant it on September 15th. If you wait till September 30th, that 2-week period, you might give up a lot of growth. So I kind of thought of the day late and a dollar short. That's kind of appropriate. And 1 day in June is equal to about 4 days or more in October. So that tells you it's something a little bit about the importance of it. And it's not just about the sunlight. Now we're also racing killing temperatures. So even if you've got a plant that can tolerate cold weather, some things that we're going to talk about are still sensitive to really, really cold weather. And so if you're trying to get them in before those really bitter temperatures in January hit, you're going to need to pay attention to this. So some species can grow in those lower light conditions, and those are some of the ones that we're going to talk about. And some of the ones we're going to mention just have shorter days to maturity. So it's not that some of these you might not be able to grow them in the dead of winter, but they have a really short days to maturity. And that's the time from when the seed germinates to the day that the plant is harvested. And these might be different ones than what you're used to planting. So if you use a certain type of carrot, like sugar snacks, or there's one with a number in it, and I can't remember what it's called now, maybe something 88. But anyway, those may work great in the springtime because you're not racing cold weather. But some of these others, they have like a 50-day to maturity. So it's not going to be necessarily the same type of carrot. It may be smaller. It may have a different flavor than what you're used to. But it meets the requirements as far as being able to grow and produce a crop in a short amount of time, or to tolerate colder weather. And I didn't want to steal anything that either of the other two guys wanted to talk about, but some of the things, maybe there's going to be just a little bit of overlap. This is just a fall planting calendar that I found online, and it shows some of the plants and when you can start them, and when, as long as you get them started in the green, you've got a really good chance of having a crop. Some of them, if you wait until you're in the yellow, they're only going to work if you happen to be somewhere where there's a really mild climate. And the ones in the red, that means it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to successfully grow these during those months. And then if you also look, there's some that are really good for container gardens or in really small spaces like raised beds. And the other shows the crops with green lettering, and I'm assuming nobody on here is colorblind. But some of these are in green and some of them are in brown. The brown ones can be a little more challenging to try to grow, just because you don't necessarily know what the weather is going to be in a given year. So I've had some years that I've been able to have carrots during the cold part of the year, and you start them in the fall, and then they just kind of hunker down and they come back out of it when they start growing again in the spring. And so don't be thinking that on the carrots, depending on the variety that you grow, some of these you might just be carrying them through till spring under a row cover or something, and then you would get a really early harvest of carrots in the spring. And so that's a different objective. Some of these you might plant them now, and if it's a 50-day maturity, you would actually be able to harvest before cold weather gets here. So it's entirely up to you what your objective is. Some of them that are in black need to be direct seeded in order to produce a viable crop. And you can, there's a few of these in here. Let me go on down. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is arugula. And I don't know if many of you have ever grown or tried arugula. It's used in salads. It's got a little bit of a zest to it. It's more flavorful than what lettuce would be. And this is one of our shortest maturity crops. So Astro is the variety that is pictured, and that's the one that UK recommends. And it's got 38 days to maturity. So if you started that right now, you should be able to have a crop of arugula in just a little over a month. And now that's pretty impressive. And so if you wanted to, you could stagger plant this. You could start a little bit in September and a little bit more in October, and you could stretch the window of when you could harvest. And I'm not sure exactly how winter hardy arugula is, if you've got some sort of covering that you could put on it. But I know like on lettuce, it will take it cold, but it won't take a killing freeze without a cover on it. And my suspicion is that arugula is similar to that. Spinach is much more hardy, and that's one that you could do all the way through the winter. And I believe that's one that I forgot to put in the slides. Carrots, we've got two varieties that UK recommends as short growing season varieties. And one is Yaya with the 56 days to maturity. And that's it on the left. And then we've got Laguna, which is 65 days to maturity. And again, if you planted these right now, you could get this in, you could harvest before bitter weather gets here, or you could start it a little later and carry it through to the spring and just have an early harvest. Collard greens is another one that is, it's kind of, I think of this one being a little more like brassica as far as being it looks to me more like a cold crop than a true green, but it is a true green. And the one that UK recommends is Champion, and that's 60 days to maturity. And some of these, let me just say that you might find that some are easy to find and others are a little more difficult, and you may have to shop around. So the seed supplier that you normally use may not be the one that happens to have this particular variety, or they may not have this particular variety in stock. I tried to order spinach, and I think it was Corsair was one that I ordered this like 5 months ago, and I specifically ordered it for the fall, to plant in the fall, because it's a real short growing season spinach. And they back ordered it, and they told me that it won't be available until February. Well, that kind of defeated the purpose of me trying to order it so early. But COVID has caused a lot of people to garden, and so it's made seed availability a lot more complicated than it normally would be. So that's probably the trick for everybody right now, is trying to find the seed of the varieties that we're going to mention to you. There's several different companies that you might try, and we're not recommending any particular one, but there are several that we have used that that we've had good luck with. And RUP seed, RUPP, is one that you might look to. Seedway is one. Johnny's and Harris, all of those are widely known garden seed sellers. You can try your local farm supply, and it's possible that they would have some of these, but my observation is they tend to focus on the spring, and they don't pay much attention to the fall. And so trying to find seed at those places can be a little difficult for fall gardening. Kale is something that this is a really hardy plant, and depending on the variety that you grow, they can be really, really short. This dinosaur one, I think it gets that name because it kind of looks like maybe like Jurassic Park, what we would picture a dinosaur looking like. I think that's pronounced lacinato, but 30 to 60 days. And I know that's a pretty good lot of variety, but 1 to 2 months, you're going to have a crop of kale. And then Blue Knot, which is a hybrid, that's here on the right. It's more in the 45 to 55 day window. Lettuce, some of these I'm sure you're familiar with, the black seeded Simpson, which is very, very common. And these are the leaf type lettuces. So this is not a head lettuce. This is just a simple little leaf. But red cells, obviously, that's the red looking lettuce. All of these are about in the 1.5 month range. There's Salad Bowl and Grand Rapids, and all of those would work really well. There's also a butterhead type that's Amish deer tongue, and to me it looked a lot like spinach, but it's kind of got that arrowhead shape to the leaf, and that's a 50-day. Mustard is another one, and Green Wave and Golden Frills, and both of these, if you'll look, I said that arugula was the shortest. Actually, it's the mustard, 21 days. That's a pretty fast turnaround to get a crop from when you seed. Swiss chard is another one. I don't know how many of you have ever used Swiss chard, but UK has kind of featured this crop a lot lately on some of our gardening publications. And I think it's just because this multicolored bright lights is, it's kind of like a centerfold as far as vegetable crops go. That's a very pretty vegetable, and that's 55 days. And then Ford Hook Giant is more in the 60-day window. So as far as why you might want to consider gardening in the winter, obviously there's almost no pests. I won't say that there's no pests. Deer can be a huge pain, depending on where you're growing. And there are some issues occasionally with other insects that will come in, especially if you're doing this in a high tunnel or a greenhouse. They can get in there, and just like the crop is enjoying the warmer weather, the insects will as well. But cooler temperatures favor certain crops. And it's already too late to start it now, but cauliflower and broccoli and some of those, if they're planted for the fall garden, those are good examples. Those cooler nights cause the plant to have more sugar in them. So they just take on a better flavor, and they don't have that toughness that's associated with the hot temperatures of summer. And so they tend to be more on the tender side as well. Another reason why you might want to think about it is you can get an early jump on spring, which I've already alluded to. And it's a good break from winter boredom. There was one year in particular that I planted spinach in the fall, and I planted way more than what we could eat in the fall. And it carried through the winter. And at one point, my wife was fixing supper, and we wanted a salad or something. And we had maybe 6 inches of snow on the ground. And I went out and was able to just brush the snow back and harvest spinach out of the snowbank for us to have fresh greens in the dead of winter. And so, again, I didn't mention spinach, but almost any of those, Tyree might be one that you want to think about, or Corvair, if you can get the seed. I think it's Corvair. It might be Corsair, but it was either Corvair or Corsair. And Jeremy or Phil, you're able to jump on here and correct me anytime I misspeak. We've already talked about the varieties and the planting dates. Jeremy's going to talk about row covers, but one thing I wanted to hit on just lightly before we drop the ball on it is voles are still out and about in the winter. And so if you've got covers on things and they're protected, they can wreak havoc on a fall or winter crop. So you'll want to put traps under those covers, or rodenticides or something like that to try to keep the voles under control. Jeremy, I'm not going to steal your thunder on the row covers, so I'll skip over that one. And on the voles, exclusion is another thing. As far as like if you're using raised beds, you can put hardware cloth, which is that metal mesh on the bottom of the raised bed, and that just prevents them from digging up and under. It obviously will not prevent them from going over the top, so it's not totally foolproof. Don't think because you've done that you won't have any problems with voles. They're quite happy to go over the side and dig down in and make their tunnels above the wire mesh. So that's all I've got. Do we have any questions?
Shad, excellent presentation. Great stuff. Great information there.
Thank you. Who wants to go next? Is that Jeremy?
I can jump in there. Yeah. I'm having technical difficulties, and so I'm actually having to work from my telephone. Went from computer to the telephone, so I hope this all works well this evening. So I guess you could say just kind of bear with me. Great to see everybody this evening. Great to have everybody back. I think this is our first Mountain Zoom since May, if I'm not mistaken. So great to have everybody back, but I'm having some technical difficulties, so I'm hoping we can work through this.
You want Phil to go and give you a little time to get yours together?
Well, I'm gonna have to bring it up anyway. The way. Just give me just a second to pull it up. May have to go about it in a different way here. Let's try something else here. Sorry about that.
It happens.
Yeah. Let's see here. It doesn't seem to be wanting to bring the, which is odd. Doesn't want to bring the,
There you go.
that bring it up.
Well, it did. And then it kicked back out.
Is it, you see it?
No, well,
Yeah,
there,
man.
yes, it's trying.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, let's try this. Let's try this and see how it works, okay? Sorry about that. Can you still see it?
Yeah, you were on cold frames and hotbeds right there.
Okay, can you see it? Can you see the picture?
Yep.
Okay, are you seeing two pictures?
No, it's only working on the one that's kind of the diagram.
Okay,
Well, go back, go over. Whatever you just did had the colored picture. There you go.
yeah, it's, for some reason, it's not wanting to bring it up. Let me just go ahead and instead of dragging this thing out, let me just go ahead and cover some things. How's that? Sorry about that. I apologize. So, so basically, let's cover a little bit about cold frames and hotbeds. First, we're going to cover some cold frames. And I hate that this presentation is not pulling up. I wish it did, but you know, we're going to talk about cold frames, hotbeds, some roll covers, and low tunnels, basically. And so the cold frames, they are basically the most useful item that you could have in of these four items, 4 or 5 items. It's the most useful. So it allows you to extend the garden season. They're simple. They're easy to make. And I hate I don't have the pictures up there, but they're definitely easy to make. Make them out of lumber. You can make them out of cinder block, brick, that sort of thing. You need to have some sort of a window type feature on the front. These things can actually be used year round to provide warmth from the sun and also to prevent water loss. You're not gonna have the evaporation issue, and you're not gonna have the wind damage, that sort of thing. So they're great for growing those crops that Shad mentioned, things like lettuce, radishes, spinach, several different things that he mentioned there, a lot of greens, that sort of thing. But they need to be built sturdy enough to withstand years of the sun, weather conditions, and also a lot of people I've seen, they'll use older windows, the old wood frame windows with the glass in it. Those are great, but they're heavy. They can be heavy, they can break, and so that you've got an issue with that. So you may want to look at something. Some alternative methods would be, like say, a cover with plexiglass or double layer clear plastic. Both are more durable and they also weigh less. So if you're needing to move this thing around, or if you've got some mobility issues about opening and closing it when you need to, that's something you could look at, like a plexiglass or the double layer clear plastic. Also, there's commercially built frames. They're lighter. They're built to specs that they're going to withstand the weather. They're going to withstand the sun. They could possibly break the wood down and cause the wood to rot. But so that may be something you want to look into. I mentioned the lids. The lids need to be hinged so they can prop open. That way, you prop them open, allows the cool air to enter the frame when need be. We get into some of those warmer days in the summer or in the winter, sun beating down on it. You may have to open that up, but especially if you're using it in the spring or late in the fall, on those warm days, you need to be able to open it up, because on those warm days, it can get hot enough to cause those plants to wilt. Now, I'm going to jump a little bit. We're going to use that same cold frame, but we're going to refer to it as a hotbed. And I hate I don't have pictures for this. I apologize. But basically, a hotbed is a cold frame that has a heating source added to the ground underneath the frame. It's buried into the ground. And what it is, you can purchase these modern devices to bury into the ground. And what they will do actually is you're going to able to heat that ground. That way that plant stays warm. That way that seed stays warm, and that sort of thing. These are controlled by thermostat, which is great. They're excellent. And that you can find those at those seed purchase locations like Shad mentioned earlier. These are also great. The hotbeds are also great for starting vegetables and flower seeds in sunlight rather than under artificial light. So hotbeds are basically cold frames with a heating source underneath it. Not necessarily a heating source in it. It's a heating source underneath the ground. That way it keeps the soil warm. I'm going to jump to a low tunnel. And I hate I don't have the pictures of these. So if you're jotting things down, this is something that you can go and do an internet search on, or you can contact one of us at your county extension office, and we get you some information on those. Low tunnels, they're similar to a cold frame, but they're larger. They're basically they're metal or plastic pipes that are bent in a hoop, and they're placed into the ground or attached to a raised bed. They work very well on raised beds as well. So you could attach them to that. The hoops are then covered with like a polyethylene cover. And what you want to do is extend that to the ground, maybe even 6 inches in length, a little bit longer. That way you can cover that up with some soil. That way cold air can't leak underneath those that cover. They can actually extend the growing season 6 to 8 weeks. As a matter of fact, I had a grower here in Harlan County that used one a couple of years ago, and it was a story a lot like Shad had mentioned. He was picking lettuce in the middle of winter, and so they can definitely extend your growing season, whether at the end of the growing season of this year or the start of the growing season next year. Now, on warmer days, you're definitely going to have to ventilate those low tunnels, and so that's simply done by just lifting the plastic on the ends of the house. That way they can blow through. And so these are simple things that you can make. Shad mentioned briefly about floating row covers. These are made of a polypropylene or a polyester material. It looks like a fabric, and what that fabric material does is it's going to protect it. They can be laid over the plants, and it allows the light and water to enter. It's permeable, and so the light and water can enter the row cover, and it can keep plants keeping those covered plants up to 5 to 10 degrees warmer than that uncovered plants. And provide frost protection. Now, I said frost protection. These are not going to provide your freeze protection. If you have freeze issues, you're going to have freeze temperatures. You're going to have issues with a floating row cover. They can also protect tender plants from the wind and rain damage. but there are great insect barriers if you'll stake those down. And like Shad mentioned earlier, if you got vole issues, you're going to have to contend with voles. You're going to have to put vole traps underneath those floating row covers. I will say as well, those row covers lay on the plant, so there could be some damage if you're selling, say, the spinach or the greens. There could be some damage to the edges of those plants. It could kind of scar them up, mark them, that sort of thing. But basically, that's what I have this evening is cold frames and hotbeds, low tunnels, floating row covers. Those are great products to use. And I apologize for not having those slides up there, having some technical difficulties this evening. So I'll turn it back over to Shad or turn it over to Phil.
Before Phil takes over, I just wanted to jump in real quick, Jeremy, and say that those row covers, you can buy that, and it's kind of a gauzy looking stuff that's in a big row that's white looking, and it will put you in mind of the fabric that's underneath your couch as far as light can go through it. But it comes in different thicknesses, and the trade-off is you're gaining insulation at the expense of light. And so the thicker it is and the better it's able to insulate against really cold weather, the more light it's going to reflect off of your plants. So I know some people that have like low tunnels or high tunnels, they will use the row covers inside those over their rows of plants to add extra insulation. And if you've never used a high tunnel or a low tunnel before, you can still lose crops in those. So if it gets cold enough, there's no supplemental heat in it. So if you end up with a really cold day, the plant can be healthy, and it's really a shame when you've got them to a certain point and then you come out and they're dead because they froze. So putting the row covers on is really handy. And if you've got old windows or old storm doors that are laying around, and this is Appalachia, so it seems like everybody's got an old storm door or some old windows somewhere that they can get their hands on. Those are really handy for using, like Jeremy said. That's the cheapest way to do this. It doesn't need to be something that you go buy a bunch of stuff that's outrageous expensive. Just use what you've got laying around.
Definitely. Good information. Thanks, Shad.
Thank you. Phil, it's all you.
All right. Well, thank you, Shad and Jeremy, for that good information. And let me share my screen here. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to look at this a little bit differently. I'm going to look more at the transitional period between your 2021 garden and your 2022 garden. It's great to be growing some kale and spinach in there, but at the same time, you can start thinking about things like sanitation and soil management and just doing some planning for your upcoming garden. And winter is an excellent time to do that. There's a joke that my grandfather used to make about gardening all winter long, because you're doing all this planning, and then when the warm weather gets there, people tend to drop some of those ideas. But just talk about some things that you can do. And here in our part of the world, from November to February, we will continue to have periodic days where it's warm enough to get outside, and maybe you're tired of being indoors and you're ready to get out and do some things in the garden, some things that are going to be productive. So one thing that you can do in those cold months is go out and remove those crop residues. If you've been to any of these mountain zooms before, and we've talked about insects and disease, those old tomato vines, those old cucumber plants, corn stalks, that's a good way to harbor disease and insects and carry that from the 2021 garden into the 2022 garden. So when you got that cabin fever and you catch a warm day, it's a good time to go out, if not before, and clear out all those old plant residues and get that garden nice and sanitized. Good time to go out and loosen the soil a bit when you've got that freezing and thawing that's happening. It's that you can work with that to help loosen up that soil and get it ready for the spring planting. You can do a soil test. We recommend that you do a soil test in the fall, but second best time would be in the winter. If you catch a time that you can go out and you can pull a soil test and you get that sent to the lab, you're going to beat the spring rush, because both of our labs, I think they in April or so, the labs get kind of backed up with everybody sending their samples in. So if you don't get that soil test collected in the fall, then wintertime would be a good time to do that. And certain fertilizers, we'll talk about that more in a bit, you can add in the wintertime. You can add lime in the winter, because if your soil has a low pH and it does require lime, it takes a good 6 months for that lime to really do its thing and bring that pH where it needs to be. So so the earlier that you can get that on, the better. You certainly don't want to wait until April or May to put the lime on. So you can put that on in the fall or in the winter. Some other challenges to think about, some of these crops that the other agents spoke about. When you're planting seeds, doing direct seeding in the garden in the fall, you do want to plant those slightly deeper than you would in the spring, just because that soil tends to be a little drier. And it also, by planting those a little bit deeper, not a whole lot deeper, but just a little deeper, it's going to give you a little more protection against the cold. You want to make use of mulch. If you don't use mulch in the spring, you certainly want to use it in the fall if you can, to preserve that soil temperature and preserve that moisture in the fall and the winter months. I think the others mentioned just there's going to be different types of weed pressure that you're going to come across in the fall, but you want to keep those suppressed to get the best growth possible. And again, maintain the soil moisture and the cooler soil temperatures on those warm days in the fall. With landscape plants, we always talk about there's a good chance for winter injury from the soil getting too dry and the plant being dehydrated. And we don't think about that much in the winter, but that is something that can happen. The plant's not taking up enough moisture because either the ground's frozen or it's just been a drier time, and that's going to make that plant very susceptible, especially when the cold winds are blowing, to that plant drying out and being injured. And the same thing can happen with garden plants. So mulch and just a careful monitoring of that soil moisture is going to work to your advantage. You can get some crust in the winter, so it might be good to keep your eye on that when you get that crust on top of the ground when we have those cold winds and all that drying effect. So again, the mulch would help with that. And winter's also going to be a good time to add some organic matter if you have some available. Again, getting those beds ready for the spring. Water, especially in late fall, you want to go in and you want to get the good deep water. And right now, doesn't seem like we're going to have to worry about watering for a while, but we do usually get a dry spell. I think last year October was very dry for us over in Wise County. So just be mindful that even in the winter months, even in the late fall, you may have to go in and water your plants, give them the equivalent of an inch of rain. Walk through your garden frequently. We recommend this in the spring and summer, but in that case, you're looking for insects and disease issues. As Shad mentioned earlier, what you're going to be looking for in the winter is any kind of mammal feeding. If you've got mammals, if you have rabbits, deer pressures, that's going to be a time when the spinach patch or the kale planting can get wiped out pretty quickly. So you just want to keep a close eye on that to make sure that's not a problem. And it'll be a good time to plan and think about your deer fencing if that's something that you need. So some other chores you might want to look at in the fall and in the winter months. Again, we talked about removing the residues and soil testing, adding the lime. Most of the fertilizers can be added. Most of your nutrients can be added well in advance of your spring crop season. The only one that is particular is nitrogen from the NPK on a bag of fertilizer. Nitrogen can volatilize pretty quickly, but if you do a soil test and it does require some phosphorus or potassium, you can apply those in the fall, you can apply those in the winter because they're going to stay in the soil. So you could look at applying those things in the winter if you were of the mind to, and then applying some nitrogen in spring during the growing season. I'm a big fan of green manure crops or cover crops that you would plant, well, now and until about mid-September. That's a good way to recover a lot of those nutrients. Cover crops will protect the top of your soil, protect your topsoil from wind and erosion during the winter months. The green manure, they function in a very similar way, but the green manures have an extra benefit in that they have a very deep taproot. And a lot of those nutrients that were on your garden in 2021, once we get the rains and we get the snows and those nutrients start to leach out, these green manure crops, they will extend very deep root systems and they'll recover a lot of those nutrients and bring them back to the surface. So you grow these green manure crops and they recover those nutrients during the fall and winter months. And then in the spring, what you do is you cut those down and you incorporate those into the soil, and you're going to recover some nutrients that might otherwise be completely leached out of your garden. Good time to establish beds during the winter months. A good time to do your garden planning. Look at different methods you could use. Spend some time perusing extension publications and get new ideas for how you want your next year's garden to produce. And then take lots of notes when you've got those days that when it turns dark at 5 p.m. and you're forced inside and you still have gardening on your mind. That's a good time to get out the notebook and keep a garden journal and just write down the ideas, write down the varieties that you want to try next year. I think a lot of us, myself included, we fall into this trap of we look at the calendar and it's May 15th and we think, oh no, I gotta get some tomato plants. So I run down to the greenhouse and just kind of grab what's within reach. Where it's much better if you can plan and research and see what varieties and vegetables are going to serve you best in your own garden. These are just some pictures of some of the green manure crops that folks around here have grown. That's winter pea up in the upper left, a nice attractive one that you would sow right about now, and by spring it's going to be a nice thick bed. And then what you would do again, you would just chop that down and let it decompose for a week or two and then till it right into the soil, and you're going to recover a lot of those nutrients. The next picture on the right there is daikon radish. Most of our soils around here are pretty heavy soils, a lot of clay content. The advantage of something like the daikon radish is it will help break up that soil. We have a grower, he's Asian, he's from Asia, Peter Yoon, over here in Wise. And he likes the daikons and he will plant those in the fall, and just amazing how that breaks that soil up. And my boss used to be a tobacco specialist, and he said they would use the daikon radish in tobacco fields when he was working as a specialist, and it would help break up that heavy soil. So that's one you could consider. Down there in the lower left, we have kale, a mixture of kale, mustard, and turnips. That makes a pretty good green manure crop, and the advantage is you can eat that as well. And then the last one there in the lower right, that's crimson clover, one that I'm particularly fond of because come spring, it's just a gorgeous plant that you have in your garden, but it has the advantage of recovering those nutrients, and it's also a legume, just like the pea up there. So it does fix nitrogen and can get some benefit that way. So I make notes every year when my first garden catalogs start coming in the mail, and it seems like it gets a little earlier every year when those start showing up. But that's a great time to sit down and just circle a few varieties that appeal to you, and then do a little research with University of Kentucky or Virginia Tech, and just see if those varieties you think would do well in your soil. Again, don't just depend on what the garden centers have available come May 15th. Try to figure out what varieties would perform the best in your own garden. And winter's a good time to do that, just to research what's out there. New varieties come along every year. New providers, new suppliers come along every year. So it pays to do a little research while you have time. A calendar is something that highly would recommend when you're sitting in your house at 7 p.m. and pitch black in January. Just go ahead and start planning out when you're going to put these things in the garden come spring. I think both of you all who are here are in Kentucky in Letcher County. So you have a great publication available to you. It's Home Vegetable Garden in Kentucky, and it has a calendar in it. It tells you for the eastern part of Kentucky when to plant certain crops, the very earliest that you can do that. So you can go ahead and just pencil that in on your calendar. And that way from there you can back up and you can put on the calendar when you need to start your cabbage transplants. If you're going to start your own transplants from seeds, you can put on the calendar when you want to start your tomato transplants, because that's something that always gets away from me every year. Is I suddenly realize that, I don't have time now to start these things from seed. So it's good to put that on a calendar while you can during the winter months, because a lot of those things you'll be starting in February if you're going to start transplants from seed. So you just got to be aware of that. Another one, if you don't use the Home Vegetable Garden in Kentucky publication, we have this handout available from Virginia Cooperative Extension, and what it does is it's the same concept, but it's based on your frost date. So if you have a first frost date of May 15th, you can backtrack, and this will give you an idea of when to plant these things based on that first frost date. So in this example here, I filled one out, and the 00 is our first expected frost. So normally ours here in Wise County is about the 15th of May. So based on that, I can see that with the collards, I can plant the collards as early as March 16th for my spring garden. So that's how this is set up. Now, if you've, where you live, maybe you're in a different type of environment and you always have your last frost May 5th, then you can shift everything and you can plant things a little bit earlier. Another way to know when to plant is there's some tables available that will tell you when to plant certain crops based on the soil temperature. And so you can put on your Christmas list that you want a soil thermometer, and just a hint, that's the exact same thing as a meat thermometer. As I ordered one from a seed catalog, and I said, that looks an awful lot like a meat thermometer. And sure enough, the package, it came as a meat thermometer. But you just put that in the soil, the depth you'll put the seed, and a chart like this will tell you that for Swiss chard, for example, you're going to wait until that soil is at least 50 degrees before you put the seeds in the ground. And if you didn't want to mess with the calendar, then having a chart like this up on your wall is going to be a good way to know when to plant your various crops. And this is another thing that I thought was pretty interesting. And what this chart tells us is the days it took for the plant to appear at various soil temperatures. So if you look down here at P, for example, a lot of folks here in Wise County, they insist on planting their peas on Valentine's Day, February 14th. Every year they want to plant that. Well, if you plant your peas on Valentine's Day and that soil temperature is 41 degrees, which it very likely could be, those peas will come up, but it's going to be 36 days or so before they emerge, before it pokes up out of the ground. But if you're patient and you monitor that soil temperature and you wait until that soil temperature is 59 degrees, then it's only going to be 9 days before those peas pop up. So if your neighbor planted on Valentine's Day and you waited till it's a little bit warmer, you would probably have peas before your neighbor would, just based on that kind of chart. But that's all I have. That brings us to here to 7 o'clock. So anybody have any questions for any of the three of us?
Phil, I wanted to point out something that you might not have gotten to enjoy since you were speaking, but this transcription thing, translated, you saying that in Virginia you plant by the frost date. It translated that to prostate. So apparently you all garden totally differently than we do in Kentucky.
You know that the transcript we had, one of our master gardeners, I think you both know him, Dr. Veda. At one of the meetings, I introduced him. I said, Dr. Veda is one of our master gardeners, and what it translated is Darth Vader is one of our master gardeners.
Did you put that down as a bullet? I would have. You got famous people that are using your programs.
Yeah.
Well, Heather or Candy, do either of you have any questions that you want to ask? I think both of you are on here for cake credit. So you have suffered through to get that cake credit.
It's been interesting. Thank you all.
If you missed anything that the guys talked about, it's going to be on YouTube and Zoom or Facebook. So it will be available to view again later. Any questions though? Okay. And Candy bragged on the presentation, so clearly she was talking about Jeremy's pictures and Phil's transcription.
So thank you all for not falling asleep. That's always good.
Thank y'all very much. Great
Next
program.
Zoom? What's the
Thank
next one?
Next Zoom will be hawk migration. That's going to be Tuesday at 6. It's going to be Ron Harrington. He's with the Bristol Bird Club, and just be talking about the different types of hawks that'll be coming through our area in the fall, and also talking about different places you can participate in a hawk watch, such as Birch Knob now. So he'll be discussing that. And then I think you all have Rick Besson, don't you, on Thursday?
Fall Invaders.
Mm-hmm.
And Phil, before we get off of here, what on the fall edibles class, we've already had several people that have asked about what all we're going to cover. And so at some point we'll need to discuss that. And I wanted to see if you had an opinion as far as the acorns. I know that the white oaks are preferable. The question will be, how available are they before September the 17th? The ones at the office from the sawtooth oaks are already starting to drop.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if that is in the red oak or the white oak family.
Sawtooth, I think red oak, so it'd be a rough one.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's got the pointy little thing. It's not lobed.
Right.
That's where those little packs of sugar come in at.
I don't think sugar would fix that. It's
Sugar.
have you ever eaten one? Have you ever eaten an acorn from a red oak before it had been leached?
I try not to.
It will suck all the water out of your mouth. And I mean, it's I've never put anything in my mouth that, other than maybe alum, the cartoons about giving people alum, they say it has that effect. But we'll need to talk, I guess, maybe tomorrow about what all we're going to cover. And
I think we'll probably have some hickories. I noticed the hickories here. I've got, I think it's mocker nuts here. They're right on the verge of being ready, so we could probably get a handful of those before
The
mid-September.
sumac is ready too.
Yeah, that'd be a good one.
Okay.
And cattail, we could do a lot with cattail. We could harvest that. We might just need a harvest day just to go out and harvest some things.
That's what I was getting at. So if
Okay.
we want to pick a date next week or the week after to try to do that, that would be great.
Okay, we can do it.
All right, very good. Well, guys, good seeing you all. And
Y'all too.
we'll see you all next time.
All right.